I believed as a German that nationalism was far behind us after 1945, after the Second World War, that we have seen what nationalism caused on the whole continent and how important democracy and the will of peace is. We see what's going on in Ukraine with this full-scale attack from Russia as in my eyes, as a meanwhile right nationalist regime of Putin. That right nationalism can mean war and the abolishment of democracy. So in all European countries, we have a new problem with right-wing extremists, which new parties wants to divide the nations, wants to divide us, and that we want to discuss on the panel. And we will start with Ksenia Holubovic from Belarus, showing what it means when human rights are playing no longer a role, when there are even very, very small parts of democracy are abolished, and when that means that terrorism against journalists are also one of the point right-wing nationalism, in my eyes, can cause. Ksenia, you are from Belarus. You got the German-French Journalist Prize for a Diary of a Revolution for Arte TV. You reported about the demonstrations in Belarus, the democratic demonstration, and then Lukashenko regime threw down everything. And you have to leave the country. Now you are working in exile, thrown out of the country. Alternatives, you can talk. What are you doing now? What do you think, what you can do in Europe for Belarus, and what democracy and human rights are mean, especially for you, also in your situation?
Place in the world for imprisoned journalists. It's a big silent gray zone in the center of Europe because the regime of Lukashenko, with big support of Putin's regime, make impossible for people inside the country to speak, to write, to have their minds openly, because you can be imprisoned for years only for one comment in Messenger, for example. For this, for last 4 years, something between 1 million and 500,000 people left the country, and thousands of these people can't return home. Most of journalists and activists now live in exile and work in exile, and now only these people can be voices of Belarusian people who can't leave the country and who live in this silent gray zone inside on this pressure. Yesterday we have terrible news that one woman killed herself because of the political repressions in Belarus. What happened when people can't speak anymore and they don't know what to do with all of these terrible conditions. This regime tried to make some harm to our relatives when they can't do anything for people and activists and journalists in exile. Sometimes they came to our relatives inside Belarus. And of course, all this happened now with the support of Putin, because most of Belarusian people want to be free, and but we know that we have these Russian troops inside our country, and I think, for my opinion, we have something like hybrid occupation of Belarus. Our situation totally depends on victory of Ukraine now, and a lot of our guys and girls fight inside Ukraine for freedom of Ukraine and freedom of Belarus. But I think we have really the most strong diaspora and opposition, maybe the most strong in the world. We have great organizations in exile which help people, which help families of political prisoners, which help people to leave the country, which help people with money, with documents. I'm proud about this because Russian opposition have not so nice diaspora, and so we all these 4 years we show the world that we are strong and that we continue our fighting. And of course, I'm tired to speak the same things for 4 years, but it's very important because millions of Belarusian people can't speak, can't write, can't speak, and all people in exile need to continue to speak for them and to speak with Western world about our problems, and to speak that we are not Russians. We have our own problems. It's different. We have our own language. It's not Russian, and our own culture. We are not brothers. Unfortunately, we will be neighbors in the future, but never brothers.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Ksenia, for this to give us the first impression of your situation and what it means when there are no human rights and no democracy is in a country that the ones who are fighting for democracy have only the choice: go to prison under a terrorist regime or go into exile. And this is, I think, a very important picture what we every time should have in our heads when we are talking about this issue, and how important it is also to support you, your work, and the colleagues in Russia and in Belarus and in other countries where dictatorship is in government. Now we are coming to the next speaker. I told on the last panel, trust is one of the important things, and I think trust and justice is also one of the main points that people in a society have to trust in the justice system when they have trouble, that the justice is working and they can get their rights by a justice system which is working. So perhaps you can give us some spotlights to the situation in North Macedonia and in the surrounding.
Thank you. Thank you very much, first of all, to the organizers for the invitation. Thank you for passing the floor to me. As you asked, and I'll address this issue, the problem with the rule of law in general and the justice in North Macedonia, but also in the region of the Western Balkans. But before that, since the general topic is the rise of the far-right nationalism, I mean, we usually speak about far-right nationalism, and of course it's all right to brand it as a far-right nationalism, but I would say it's the rise of political extremism in general, whether it's far-right, far-left. Of course, far-left is not so present in Europe, because Europe has a tragic history of far-right nationalism. But what we can see is that I mean, this is not a new phenomenon, and I think that for the last decade, I have been on many conferences like this. We were constantly speaking that far-right nationalism is poses a danger for our societies, that we have to find a way how to face it, but the far-right nationalism was constantly growing. And I think that on many events it was more important for some speakers to find the right words in order to speak properly or politically correct, and not to really speak openly about the problem of the far-right nationalism and why the far-right nationalism exists and why it's on the rise. So first, I think that we have to face a situation now where we have to admit that far-right parties and far-right political forces are among us, and they are here to stay. And we will have to accept that reality, learn how to live with that, and do not let them prevail and become governments, because if they prevail and become governments, like in Russia or Belarus or in Hungary, then we have real problem, because then we go into opposition and we'll have to fight them from a completely different position compared to the position when moderate, center-right, center-left governments are in power. And why I said that, I mean, we are for too long time speaking about the problem of far-right nationalism and practically doing nothing to face it. I remember 11 years ago, 2013, I was in Heidelberg at the Max Planck Institute for International Law and Public Law when the elections in Germany took place, and several months before that, the AfD party was established in Germany. And when the election results came in September, I remember the day after, I went to the institute with other researchers there discussing. Among some of them, there was a jubileeing atmosphere that AfD didn't manage to pass the 5% precondition. It was 4.98%, and they would say, oh, good, I mean, the AfD is not in the parliament. To be honest, I couldn't understand that, because a party that was formed just several months before that almost managed to enter the Bundestag, and I gave only one comment, is that I'm now sure that on the very next elections, they would enter the parliament and they will become, as they are now, the second political force in the country that is stronger even than the old German Social Democratic Party. And I'm speaking very emotional about this because I'm myself Social Democrat, so it's very hard for me to understand how many people, many clever people, didn't realize and didn't manage to develop some strategy of addressing the causes, not the party, the AfD party itself, but the causes for the right of the far-right nationalism. And I think that one of the problems is that I mean, the moderate people, I mean, not just politicians, but also activists were avoiding to admit what is now inevitable to admit, and that is that the social contract established after the Second World War, as you said, is not longer in force. I mean, there is decreasing trust of people in the institutions. People feel that the institutions are not working for them. People feel that they have no dialogue with the institutions, and that the institutions are not delivering what they are supposed to do. Of course, most of these feelings are irrational, and we can regret that they are irrational, but we have to face that that's politics. It's not only about making rational choices, although at university we are teaching students about making rational choices. It's also about perceptions and irrational fears that were left, that were not addressed by the mainstream political parties. But that's a problem, let's say, for Europe. Now I'll go to our region, and that is the problem of justice. I mean, we see in all of the countries of the Western Balkans, and now in North Macedonia, that anti-democratic forces, I would say, and political extremism is also on rise here. And one of the reasons in the Western Balkans, it's not only specifics for the Western Balkans, it's specifics for most of the so-called democracies in transitions or underdeveloped democracies, is the problem with the functioning of the rule of law. It's the rampant corruption, especially the high corruption, the organized crime. Many promises that were given to the people that this issue will be addressed, that the justice will be delivered, and then these promises were not fulfilled, and painful compromises were being made because of achieving some other important issues on the expense of the rule of law. And now, for example, in North Macedonia, we see that the people are completely disillusioned with the justice system. We are one of the unique examples where people, less than 2% of the population believes the courts that they are able to deliver justice. And this is not just a problem for the functioning of the system, of the judiciary. This is a problem for the stability of the society, of the entire society. Why? Because when people feel that they cannot receive the justice in front of courts, they are inclining towards more radical, more, so to say, revolutionary measures that are promising that instead of corrupted elites that are ruling the country, including the courts, they would bring the justice, and this justice is not necessarily a justice in courts, but it's also a justice that can happen on the streets. One, I would say, fortunate element in this unfortunate situation is that the Balkans has a long history of nationalism. So nationalism is part of the political mainstream for a very long time. So we have now also mainstream political parties that are still controlling the people, you know, not to go too far right. So we have parties on the right that are practically covering the bigger space from center-right to almost far-right. But we now, at least in North Macedonia, see tendencies that although our right-wing parties, or those parties who claim to be center-right, were right enough for many decades, now we see that even more right than the right-wing parties is emerging. One party that is practically trying to cover everything from far left to far right, except for the center, is becoming more and more populism. Their appearance in the public is very radical, and when all decent, moderate people say, I mean, if we think rationally, such rhetorics and such actions should lower their popularity. After every radical action, their popularity is increasing, and I'm confident that on the next elections in this country, either local elections next year or the next parliamentary and presidential elections, we will see how strong this far right and political extremism will be, and we shouldn't be surprised because of such developments. Now, with the new government in place, again we hear the same promises that there will be organized and systematic fight against organized crime and corruption. And there are, of course, some actions that are perfectly okay, but whether this commitment will be really a sincere commitment, we will see when the fight against corruption will not be limited only to the formers, but will actually be expanded to those who are currently exercising political power, because it's quite easy to combat corruption with the formers that are not anymore, that do not anymore have the positions that they used to have. The problem comes when you have to combat corruption in your own ranks. And to be honest, although the former government came on the vast popular support to confront the rampant corruption in the society, unfortunately, although there were some steps made in that direction, the former government didn't manage to do that. And I would admit that bears the responsibility for the rise of the far right or of the political extremism in our country. So to finish with this, I think that if we start speaking sincerely about the problems, the weaknesses of the mainstream, it is much better approach than just to speak about the problem of the far right and to explain to ourselves, because I have feeling that we are speaking with like-minded people, how far right is dangerous. We know that the far right is dangerous. Now the question is how to oppose the far right and how to make the mainstream again attractive for normal people, because of course we cannot expect to change the people. I mean, people are those who are, whether we like them or we don't like them, with their rational and irrational nature, with their fears, with their problems, with the hatred, with the nationalism, with their cultures, identities. They are here, and we as mainstream will have to learn how to make ourselves attractive for them instead of putting the blame on political radicals. Thank you.
It's hopefully right pronounced, Maric.
No, I'm Alexander Spasov. Yes. Mr. Maric will be online.
Okay, no, no, sorry. Yeah, because he wanted to be online, yes. But something went wrong.
Ah, okay.
Okay, then we can have a look at the influence of right wing to the relationship in the whole Balkan. We all have in mind the cruel Balkan wars based on nationalism, and we all have the fear when we also in Germany, every one of us are listening to news about Serbia, Kosovo, and that the new war is not could be happen too. Yeah. What does that mean for peace in Balkan?
Regarding these problems that you mentioned, I mean, the nationalism is an old thing in the Balkans, and as I said, the fortunate aspect is that we learned in the past how to live with those problems. As long as the political, I mean, as long as the mainstream right is holding the power, there will be always problems, of course, with nationalism in the Balkans, because they, unfortunately, there is no center-right in the Balkans. In most of the countries, they are much more right than the center-right. We will have to live with this situation, because right-wing governments are feeding themselves from creating those problems. But there is one thing, and that we can, I mean, not be completely sure about, is that there is although the conflicts are always there, I mean, I don't expect that we will repeat the bloody wars from the 90s, because even the right-wing governments now in the Balkans do not have the need to produce wars, because they can live from this nationalism, heating the conflicts but never letting the conflicts turn into war. I mean, if you are referring to the Serbia-Kosovo relations.
Okay, thank you. I just got from Xavier the message that Mr. Maracic is online, and I think we can give him the word as an civil society activist, and also having the EU accession in the middle of his work, and law and politics is also one of his fields. So, Mr. Maracic, your view on right-wing nationalism, far right-wing nationalism on the Balkan. What does that mean for North Macedonia? What does it mean for the whole region, and the process to come to the European Union, nearer, or member of European Union? Hopefully,
yeah,
technique
I
works.
Can hear you. Can you hear me? I hope you can hear me, because I hear you perfectly. Thank you for the opportunity. I have to tell, I'm very sorry that I'm not in Skopje today, but I'm in Podgorica, working here a workshop with the negotiation team for European Union. The issue of the nationalism on the Western Balkans, but also in the EU, is a long-standing one. I would agree with what Professor Spasov said, that nationalism is not new in the Western Balkans. But I think what is new is that it has dominated the European political scene in the past, let's say, past decade in particular. On the Western Balkans, there were always two competing narratives: the narrative of the European integration and the narrative of right-wing nationalism that dominate the conflict or conflictious narrative in the Western Balkans. Usually, when one of them doesn't work, the other dominates. So whenever the European integration as a narrative doesn't work and doesn't show results, then the nationalism, right-wing radical nationalism dominates with conflictious, or the narrative of the conflict. That's unfortunately part of the political battle and the cleavage in all of the European societies. What we are witnessing in the past decade, and particularly past several years in France, in Italy, in Hungary, in Germany, as was mentioned, in the Netherlands, in many of the Visegrad Group also countries, is something that is making us think that this is not only a Balkan specialty, but it is now a pan-European battle. And I truly think that it is a pan-European battle. And that pan-European battle gets now at the moment, particularly in the countries of Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, gets a radical form, and gets a form in which this political battle becomes societal battle, with huge gap between the two parts of the society. Why is this important? I don't think that we can solve the challenge if we don't go to the root. The root is how the politicians, how the mainstream political parties, and how the institutions are dealing with the emotions of the people. Because apparently the politics, not only in the Balkans, but also in the EU, the politics is about emotions. It's not only about plans, it's not only about laws, it's not only about programs, but it is also about emotions. And I think that the rise of the radical nationalism, right-wing nationalism in North Macedonia particularly, was a result of some unaddressed emotions of most of the Macedonian citizens who are who felt in some way disappointed, in some way played out by the European Union and by parts of the government. I'm not only civil activist, I was for 7 years in the government, so I have a special responsibility also to speak about this. And also, I think that now we need to deal with those emotions and to translate them into action, to translate them into political action that will counter the radical right-wing nationalism. I think that we also have to bear in mind that the EU narrative, the narrative of pro-integration or pro-enlargement narrative, is something that is still valuable and still an asset of the progressive societal groups, because at some point it was in crisis, and I think it's still somehow in crisis, that it's not very popular to talk about European Union and European accession. But if you follow closely, you will see that even the governments that are pleading or pledging more to right-wing nationalism, they are afraid to openly criticize the EU accession. They are afraid to openly give up of the EU accession. And they don't want to leave the impression to the citizens and to the voters that they're not interested in EU accession. To the contrary, they use the narrative that they are genuinely pro-Europeans, that they genuinely work in this area, but even though when sometimes they don't deliver the right results. And this is our hope. This is our field of battle that we need to take. I'll finish by saying what I think is necessary to do. Because first of all, we have to be aware that we need to be ready for a fight, for a political and societal fight that does not mean any violence, but it means fight for the minds and the hearts of the people, fight for our arguments, and fight for our new narrative, new progressive and pro-European narrative that will bring hope and bring optimism to the people, that option is much better and should be embraced rather than the radical far-right nationalism. When I say this, I think that all the political actors, including the political parties and the civil society, needs to be ready to fight in what they believe, and to fight for the values they believe in. Because we can see how our friends and our like-minders fight in very severe conditions in Ukraine, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Belarus. We have heard what the colleague said about Belarus. And if they can do this fight in such difficult conditions, with such a high level of threat to their existence and their lives, I think it's much easier for us in the Western Balkans to fight for these values and to fight for European integration in which we believe in. I will finish by saying what we need. We need a clear plan for joining the European Union that will be approved and adopted by the European Union itself. We cannot succeed in the efforts without a clear and honest intention of the European Union to get us in the Union as members. I know that Montenegro and Albania are working very hard to finish the negotiations in a foreseeable future by the end of 26, or for Albania by the end of 27. And I think that that should be done by all the countries in the region, that we all need to make a clear plan how to finish the accession negotiations and how to make the necessary reforms as soon as possible. But that needs to be approved and embraced by the European Union as a real plan if we want us to succeed. And if we do that, that will give us fuel to fight on in each of our societies, to fight on in order to succeed and to stop the radical nationalism that has brought a lot of tragedies and a lot of unfortunate situations in our region, in the Western Balkans. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Before we have a closer look also to Bosnia-Herzegovina and the surrounding, I want to ask Mika Beuster, as a president of the German Journalists, to show what right-wing nationalism and this right-wing party, even in Germany, means for journalistic work and for producing a democratic audience, or to informing the democratic audience. And there I think this is also very interesting that you are not alone with the pressure of right-wing nationalism, that in Germany, you mentioned it in your statement before, that the AfD with 18%, it means 82% are against them. Let's say it in a positive way. Mika, but you have also a lot of experiences what it means for freedom of speech, for journalistic work, when right-wings, far right-wings nationalism is coming to the stage.
Coming to the stage, and it's coming to the stage with force. We have an election of the German parliament, the Bundestag, in February. And as you referenced, the AfD, the so-called Alternative for Germany, will be expected to be maybe in second place, 18 to 20% roughly of the votes. And they are a right extremist party. They turn right at every election, far more right, up to the place that you could say they're using openly a Nazi language now, a reference to the Nazi regime, unheard of in German politics before, which for obvious reasons had problems with the time between 1933 and 1944, and it was not acceptable in the German political system to reference anything during that time period as positive in any political wing. So now it's common for the AfD to reference it, and what we realize in the German public is that there's no outcry anymore when that happens. You grow insensitive to these references, and that's also due to the media reporting. It's a sensation the first couple of times it happens, and after that you say, okay, that's what they do. And that's what they do seems to be the reaction to the reporting about right-wing nationalist movements, is once the sensation wears off, you have to talk about the contents. And Heather, I really like, now I remember what I liked about, what I wanted to tell you when we had a coffee is, right-wing movements or parties in countries around the world share one thing, and you put it very interestingly. You said it's a global phenomenon, but people experience it locally. So they do not abstract and say, oh, that's a global trend that we're experiencing. My personal situation is due to the elites in my country not working right. And thusly, nationalism is the answer to the problem. And when we're in this room discussing solutions to the problem, we tend to focus on the national level as well and say, well, the solution has to be on the local level, but we disregard the global aspects of the thing. And one major aspect is, and we see that in German journalism as well when we report about right-wing extremist and national movements, is the use of platforms such as Facebook, X, Twitter, or just let's call them Silicon Valley platform industry that controls a huge percentage of what content actually reaches the audience. And there's no regulation whatsoever. We have tried in Europe, at least. We have the Digital Service Act, we have the European Media Freedom Act, but the regulation is not strong enough to regulate those platforms. And what do we see? The platforms are the ones that make right-wing extremists great all around the globe. Think of Donald Trump. What would he be without Elon Musk and X and about True Social? Think of the Chinese government and TikTok. Think of actually TikTok being the preferred medium of the AfD amongst youth. They score really high values in the younger population in Germany, because that's how they reach their audience, and traditional media doesn't. So we have to think about how do we reach our audience as traditional media. It's not just about reporting the facts, it's getting the reporting to the audience. But how do we do that if we don't have an infrastructure? And we need to talk as Europeans about a European infrastructure to get our news to the people. I see lots of cameras, I see lots of microphones. That used to be the way how we reported. But that audience, we don't reach anymore, and we do not have the infrastructure to do that, and we need to talk about that in a European sense. We need European infrastructure. We need European independence from infrastructure abroad, from Silicon Valley technical companies, from Chinese TikTok. We need, let's say, a European Facebook to dream about it. That's be regulated under European regulation and so on. And then we dry out that swamp in which disinformation, propaganda, and fake news can grow, which they use. So looking back to Germany and zooming back in Germany and how it will affect you here in the room, the Balkan region, and the whole of Europe, I do not expect a landslide victory of the AfD. It will be around 18 to 20%. That also means that about roughly 80% of the Germans do not vote for right-wing extremists. Might seem naive viewpoint, but you have to keep that in mind to keep the real perspective, because it's a narrative that they spread. We're the second largest political force in Germany. They're not a force at all. They're preaching to their own choir. What they say is not acceptable in 80% of the political spectrum. We have to keep that in mind, but and that's the point we should worry about. It's not only the AfD. We have a new political party on the left wing that's pro-Putin, that's pro-Russia, and that shares 80 to 90% of the ideology of the AfD, just on the left-hand side of the spectrum, with the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, which is centered around a person, which seems to be a new trend in extremist and populist politics. So you take one person and make that the party, and that happens there. And her potential is around 10%, 8 to 10% in the election. Now we have 30% pro-Russian, populist to leaning to extremist votes, and they're very much media aggressive parties that rely on the platforms to reach their audience. They're against media, supporting traditional media, public broadcasting, and journalism. They will, if they have the opportunity, put into effect legislation that will hinder the free press to work efficiently. So we should be worried about strengthening, but we should not be worried that they will have a majority, a working majority, or even be part of a government in Europe in this election. But we need to keep an eye on the still stable countries in Europe, because they're the beacons that shine the light to the regions that are fragile. So the more important is that we talk about this here, Wolfgang, and connect people, journalists, civil society, because we cannot rely on the governments in Europe to do the job for us. It's our job to provide the stability in society, and journalists can be part of that solution if they act smartly. And I'm very interested in what else we can learn today from that.
Okay, thank you very much. Mika, we are running a little bit out of time, but I think it's so important that we now have a view to Bosnia-Herzegovina in the relationship, and what we all have in mind, how problematic the whole situation is with nationalism, with this whole weakness of Bosnia-Herzegovina, and how dangerous the situation can develop if nationalism will win. And then we will have, I think, also a very interesting view what had happened in Britain, and from the European perspectives, what we can do. But first, you have the microphone to Bosnia-Herzegovina.
It's very dangerous.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for hospitality and for inviting me to speak on this event. I think it's very important what panelists of this panel and the last panel say today. I'm a historian, and I will try to speak briefly and save the time for other participants, because historians love to speak more and more. In the past period, in Europe, you see that far-right movement have a big support from people. And I often wonder what happened in Germany, in Netherlands, in Italy, in other states who give support for the nationalism and for far-right movements. This situation in Europe is very dangerous for Bosnia and Herzegovina and other West Balkan. For example, if you remember, ex-Prime Minister of Great Britain, Mr. Cameron, said that Serbian is the Russian proxy in the Balkan, if you remember. This is a problem for Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have the rise of nationalism, the rise of the rigid and malicious politic in Bosnia and Herzegovina from the Serbian side. And relevant research told us that Russia supports the rise of far-right, that support the rigid project in Bosnia and Herzegovina and West Balkan, and these politics have support across the Europe. For me, the symbol of the far right in Europe is the Prime Minister of Hungary, Mr. Orban. And after Trump win in last month in US president election, we had a big event in Banja Luka. People go to street, Serbian people go to street and celebrate to Trump's win. And Milorad Dodik, first man of the BiH entity Republika Srpska, and one of the most problem in Bosnia and Herzegovina and other Balkan, say that he have a good relationship with Orban, he have connection with Fico in Slovakia, and he say, okay, I have good connection with Orban, Orban have good connection with Trump, and that's the point. That's the big chance for Republika Srpska and for Russia to have influence in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I think because the big nationalism, because past, because of genocide, we have a problem in relationship in Bosnia and Herzegovina. You know, more than 800 people killed in Srebrenica genocide. Thank for Germany people and Germany government to support a resolution of this resolution of Srebrenica in last period, and we emphasize that the growth of the right movement in Europe, that growing, and I think in next period will growing around Europe. I think Bosnia and Herzegovina have a problem with Russia, not like Belarus, but if you read in the Bosnian media and media in region, ambassador of Russia in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Mr. Kalabuhov, last week said that bomb was planted under Bosnia. Bomb was planted under Bosnia because Bosnian political support South interconnection in the federal parliament of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we don't have support from European Union in this critical, I think, period. And we need the strong decision from EU to to say, okay, Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Kosovo want to join us, want to join to European family, and we will support them. Policy of enlargement of European Union is our priority, but I think the far right and this situation in Europe and the USA can be treated for us. Okay. Also, I think the far right politics played with emotion of people. Far right politics in Balkans and Europe give us simply solution for big problems. And I think that's a big problem for us in Bosnia and Herzegovina. For me and for people in Bosnia and Herzegovina, NATO pact, EU pact, Euro-Atlantic pact is the more important in our foreign policy. Okay. And I think this is a good place to see that we have a problem with Russia influence, and we need support from EU and NATO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much for this important view to Bosnia-Herzegovina. In this region, one of the most important points of security and nationalism. Last but not least, Roger Casal, as a further member of the British Parliament and founder of New Europeans and now first secretary of the European People's Forum, and he has both the view to Britain, Brexit, and the view to Europe. What does that all mean with nationalism and right-wing extreme nationalism? Roger, you have the mic.
Thank you very much indeed, Wolfgang, and good morning, everyone. And I'm going to try to be brief. It's 5 to 1, and I live in Italy, and I don't know what it's like here in North Macedonia, but when it gets to 1 o'clock in Italy, everything stops for lunch. And I'm aware that I'm the only thing that stands now between you and lunch. But I do want to tell you that, yes, I'm British, but I'm a British European. I'm not rushing back to Britain to try and make Britain great again, but I would like Britain to be more European again. And I hope you can help us with that. And I'd like North Macedonia to be closer to Europe as well. And you know, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to be here, to be part of these conversations. And you know, Wolfgang reminded us that nationalism and authoritarianism march down the same road side by side, and it's the road to war. And so we need to reflect on that, not just this week, Human Rights Week, Week of Democracy, but at all times. And you know, as a European, I know that Europe is a peace project, but I'm not old enough, none of us are old enough to have had direct experience of the war, but I did have direct experience of the Berlin Wall coming down in 1989. In fact, I lived in Berlin at that time. And I know that it's not naive to believe that big changes are possible and big changes can come. And I lived in Italy. Actually, I was studying Bologna at SAIS Bologna when the Italian Republic fell under the weight of its own contradictions and bribery and corruption. And so I don't want to be told that it's naive to believe that change can come. I know that change can come. I've seen it. And I went back to Britain in the early 1990s, and I became a member of Parliament for the Labour Party, and I won a parliamentary seat that had been Conservative for 50 years. And people told me, you're naive to believe that change can come. And change did come. And we live in a constant time of flux and a constant time of change. And the climate is changing, not just the natural environment and the climate and the rising temperature, but the political climate is changing. And there are a big storm coming, storm after storm coming towards us. And we've seen this in Britain as well, with the rise of right-wing populism that pushed Britain out of the European Union and then also brought the worst post-war government that Britain has had in the form of the government led by Boris Johnson. And I just want to share, if I may, Wolfgang, just a couple of reflections about that. It was fascinating listening to all the discussions about different situations, and as Heather reminded us, there's a global context, but it's also very, very local. But what have we learned? What have I learned looking at that? I think the first lesson would be that when you look at these right-wing populists like Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson and so on, is we shouldn't have any illusions about them. We shouldn't have the illusion that they really want what they say they want. You know, Nigel Farage, I don't believe, actually wanted Britain to come out of the European Union. He had a very nice job as an MEP, and he was on television all the time. And it was what he wanted to do was to stoke this sentiment against the European Union to further his own political aims. I don't think he believed they were going to win the referendum. And in fact, the look on his face, he was shocked when they did. So don't confuse what they say they want with what they actually want. What he wanted to do was to feather his own nest, as we say, to build up his own power and his own interests. And I think, you know, once in power, they're not going to do what they said they were going to do. Yeah? It's one thing to win the election, it's the next thing to be in power. Boris Johnson won the election on a big majority. He was Prime Minister with a small majority, and then he had a big majority on a ticket that was lowering taxes as a share of government income, reducing migration, yeah? And, you know, none of these things happened while he was Prime Minister. Migration doubled in Britain during the time of the British Care. It went from 600,000 a year, which was very high, to 1.2 million, which was completely unprecedented. And yet he'd won the election on the basis of an anti-migration ticket. Government spending as a share of national income went up, it didn't go down. And they made a total mess, as we know, of COVID and so on. So, you know, what is it that they're not ideologically committed to what they say they're going to be. This is a trick that they play to raise the feeling and to get them into power. So you have to think, what is it they actually want? And a lot of the time what they want is to use power to their own personal advantage. So you're going to see corruption, you're going to see crime and so on as a result of these populists coming into power. And I think the other thing to say about it is don't confuse the voters with the leaders. I think on the whole, looking at other parts of Europe, I live in Italy now, I think the right-wing leaders are often they are committed. Some of them are committed. Some of them do believe what they say. And they are very right-wing. And they come from a kind of heritage and a legacy that in some cases is very authoritarian, even fascist. They can dress themselves up in a different way. They can speak a different language. They can try to pull off the trick of normalizing the idea that you've got extremist right-wing leaders in power. So you say, well, she's not so bad, she sounds nice, and so on. I even have some of my former, I'm in a WhatsApp group with some of my former friends from Johns Hopkins Bologna from 30 years ago, saying, you know, the Prime Minister of Italy, she's not so bad, you know, and I was thinking, all that money spent on liberal education, they can't see a right-wing populist leader where they've got it in front of them. It's easy to think that because of the language people use, because there's an agenda which is to normalize this, to make us think that it's normal to have extreme right-wing people in power. It's not normal. It's not normal at all. It's dangerous. But I think one shouldn't confuse that with saying that all the people who vote for these parties are extreme right-wing populists. They're not. You know, and often the left and the centre, you react by saying, oh, they're all fascists, all right-wing, they're all extremists. Not necessarily the voters. The question we have to ask is not have, you know, nearly 18% of this, when this happens, I think it'll send shockwaves through Europe, 20% for the AfD in Germany. But I don't think it means that all of the people who vote for the AfD are Nazis or fascists or whatever you want to call them. And I think it's a mistake to label them as such. We have to understand why are people who are not fascist voting for parties that are fascist? That's the question we have to ask ourselves and find an answer to that. And I think the other lesson is that the right-wing extremists, they benefit from polarization. They provoke and then they polarize, and then that's their pathway to power. And and then when they're in power, there's a pot of gold, not for you and me, but for them. People used to say about Boris Johnson, he thinks it's one rule for him and one rule for everybody else. And I said, no, it's a mistake. He thinks there's one rule for everybody else and no rule for him, no rule at all. They want to get to power so that there's no rule for them. What do we do? Well, I think we have to address this issue, and I just finished with this issue of polarization. We have to start with ourselves, actually. There's a tendency when you see the monster on the horizon to focus on the monster and attack the monster and so on. And they have to be held to account. And we have to do all the things we've been talking about as well. But we also, there are other things that we need to do too. It's not either or. And there's a lot that we need to do about ourselves as Democrats, committed Democrats. You know, the new vision for Europe has to be a vision that is going to be not just a peace project, but also a Europe that is a safe space for democracy and human rights. And we as citizens and civil society organizations, we have a responsibility to build that new Europe from the grassroots up every day. And I think a lot of it is about a culture of civility. A lot of it is about how we relate to each other. It's what Heather was telling us about, finding an empathy. When I was an MP, I represented one constituency, Wimbledon. And one of the nicest things that people could say to me was, look, I didn't vote for you, but you're doing a good job as my MP. So they respected the fact that I was there trying to be there for everybody. I was proud to be a Labour MP, but once I was the MP, I represented everybody. And when I lost, and I did lose in the end, the person who replaced me was a Conservative. And I said to him, I hope that people will come to you and say, I didn't vote for you, but you're doing a good job for my MP, in the way that they used to come to me. Because what's important is not Conservative or Labour. What's important is that people's lives are getting better in this community. And I think we've lost that sense of the common ground, of the centre ground, where, you know, there are things that would divide us and that we differ about, but there are also things that we can agree about. And I hope we can agree that the future of Europe is to be a safe space for democracy and human rights, whether we're on the centre left or on the centre right. And we can work together to reinforce and to build that centre. The organisation that I lead now, European People's Forum, it's a lot of organisations that are specialised in citizens' assemblies. And I would like to offer our help in coming here to Skopje and to other places and having citizens' assemblies, holding the space where people from different points of view can come together. And out of it, they're not going to walk out of the room agreeing with each other about everything. But I hope they walk out of the room with a better understanding of why they feel what they do, and the other person feels what the other people feel what they do, and that we can somehow build a common ground, a common space that isn't just about lying and negative emotion and polarization with the sole purpose of leading one particular political formation to power, not for the purposes of serving the public interest and the common good, but to help themselves. In the end, don't we want politicians who are in politics for the right reasons, trying to do good for the public, trying to make life better for citizens? And, you know, citizens are smart. They find you out. They can see if you're not genuine or authentic. We need a different political culture. We need a different public conversation, as well as all the other things that we've been talking about. And I think that starts with each one of us. That's something that each one of us can do. And I hope that that will be something that each of us take away from a conference like this at this important time in this important week. Let's work together to make Skopje, North Macedonia, Britain, Europe, a safe place for democracy and human rights. Let's go out with that commitment. And each of us, no contribution is too small. Each of us do what we can towards that end. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thank you very much, Roger, for your words. I think we have a lot of things to think about and a lot of informations, but one thing is important, that we have a common aim, and this aim means defending democracy, because I think everyone here knows how important it is for peace and for development of our societies and development in Europe. And now we finish the second panel. Xabi has the word for, hopefully, for good news concerning lunch.
Yes. I would just like to mention, Ivan Okay, I'd like to mention these devices here are not decoration. You can use them to participate to the course of discussion, although I admit that the two moderators were filling the time with distinguished ladies and gentlemen who were on the panel, but still I hope that there will be time enough in the third and the fourth panel for participation from the audience. That's one thing. I'd like to also mention that in the hall, when you get out now, you will see the exhibition, Defending Democracy exhibition, which in 15 photographs tries to summarize the 25 years of work of my friends, my colleagues, my distinguished fighters for human rights and freedoms for these 25 years. But also bear in mind that in 2017, just around the Bloody Thursday, as we call it, our office was attacked. And money were not taken. Well, money they wouldn't have found, but it was about to make damage and to steal a great deal of our archive from the previous years. Still, many of it is here, and please feel free to comment on that on your social profiles as well. Thank you very much until now, especially for those that were already filling in the program and welcoming the third and the fourth panel participants. Thank you, Wolfgang, you especially for all the efforts. Thank you. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being part of this distinguished panel.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.